All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. And as folks file in, they'll join wherever they are. This webinar is being recorded. We will send out a link to the recording. So if you would like to review it later, you'll be able to do that. A couple housekeeping items. One, questions are strongly encouraged. We ask that you post them into the chat feature. That way we can address them at the end of the webinar. Please do though post those questions as soon as they come to mind so you don't forget them when we get to the end. And again, any resources mentioned today will be sent in a follow-up email. A little bit about me. My name is Steve Robinson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder and CEO of Brilliant Metrics. I've got about 20 years of experience between software development and marketing, the last 10 or 15 in marketing. I teach a variety of courses at UWM School of Continuing Ed on digital marketing, and I'm married with 3 beautiful children who hopefully won't interrupt this webinar. A little bit about Brilliant Metrics. Brilliant Metrics is a B2B digital first marketing agency. Our clients really come to us and stay with us, not so much because we are a full service digital marketing firm, but because together we continuously improve, we get better. Our clients gain additional technology, understanding, knowledge, capabilities, and most importantly, have greater impact every year they work with us. Okay, enough about that. Let's get into Google Analytics 4. We're going to cover 4 topics today. We're going to cover what's new and what changed, right? How you should manage the transition, how you should move from current analytics to Google Analytics 4. Some key gotchas or pitfalls that we've noticed as we've begun the transition for our clients and ourselves to Google Analytics 4, as well as some keys or some pro tips to success. I'm not going to get to calling them best practices yet because this is all pretty new and Google's still changing stuff, but certainly some tips that we found to get the most out of the platform. And then we're going to end things with the shiny fun stuff, and that is all the new features and capabilities that Google Analytics 4 gives us compared to prior versions. So diving right in, what changed and why? Why is Google doing this to us? We all know the old analytics. We're used to it. Why are you going and messing us up? Well, the reality is that Google Analytics, as we know it, now called Universal Analytics, is actually a really old piece of software. It dates back to the early 2000s. And at the time, it was called Urchin Analytics. So Universal Analytics is actually a backronym. Google had to figure out what UA stood for when they killed the Urchin name. And so Urchin Analytics became Universal Analytics, and you'll see things like a UA number in your analytics interface. That's referring to the old platform. The old platform largely has worked the same. Certainly Google has made upgrades. They've changed things under the covers, changed some of the reports and presentations. But at the core, it was based on some core fundamental concepts of the idea of page views and events and sessions, and everything revolved around a session. That doesn't make sense in a modern world where what is a page view when you have a single page application, a website that is all JavaScript and super interactive, and you don't really change pages. So what does a page view mean anymore? And then marketers want to understand the complete user journey as users bounce back and forth between mobile apps and their website. And so how do you track activity from a mobile app using the existing analytics? It gets pretty ugly. And so they started trying to figure out a way that you can combine app and web traffic into one user interface in a way that made cohesive sense. And at the end of the day, they couldn't take the current Google Analytics and evolve it to do so. They basically had to wipe and start clean. And so the current version of the Google Analytics 4 is basically a rewrite of Google Analytics from the ground up. There is almost nothing that is exactly the same as the old Google Analytics. So let's talk about some of those changes. Like I said before, Universal Analytics, the analytics we know and love, is based on the idea of sessions and page views. Analytics 4 introduces a two-level hierarchy of users and events. Everything is either a piece of data about the user or an event that that user did. So what does that look like? Well, you can think about the old hierarchy of having users at the top. Each user would have a series of sessions. Within a sessions, there would be a series of page views, and then within page views, there'd be a series of events. So events could be anything from, clicks or form submits or whatever you would configure it as an admin as an event. And these required a fair amount of configuration in the old analytics. In the new analytics, you only have two levels. You have a user, and then you have events. Sessions are actually nothing more than an event. They are a session start event. Every click, every page view is just an event. And you, as the marketer or the admin, have complete control over what you want to call all of your events. They come with a series of stock events, which are a lot more valuable than the old analytics stock event, or stock page view was really all you got. But you have complete control over what you want to call an event. So if you have a mobile app and a website and a couple web applications that people can interact with, you can make very specific events for exactly what you want to track. The second big change is in the customizability. Google Analytics, Universal Analytics had some very limited customization you could do. You could add some custom dimensions, but it was really a pain to do so. You could set up some custom dashboards or some custom reports, but they were really pretty much the same thing over and over again, and relatively, I wouldn't say powerful. The new Google Analytics 4, you can change everything up to and including the left-hand navigation. You have complete control over every single report that sits underneath the hood. You can create cards to show insights that are important to you and your business throughout the entire interface. You are in complete control with Google Analytics 4. All right. Another core difference is that you can think about Universal Analytics as being a tool for generating metrics or data. And it was up to you, the marketer, then go and hunt and sift and peck through this data to go and try and generate insights, pieces of information that are actually useful or valuable in their own regard. GA4 is designed from the ground up to produce those insights for you, largely through the use of artificial intelligence. So for example, under universal analytics, you would see things like, user sessions, bounce rate, session duration, those sorts of metrics. You could graph them over time, but you had to go in and find, well, when did something change significantly? When is something off? When is something different? Analytics 4 actually has a couple of tools built in. They have what's called automated insights, which are cards that will alert you, if you go to that portion of analytics, to anomalies within the data. Hey, we suddenly saw a huge uptick in mobile traffic, or this date was way different from other dates. You might want to look into it. They don't always tell you exactly why things happen because, well, it's not that smart of artificial intelligence, and it doesn't know what you did as a marketer to trigger that event, but it will tell you that something happened. So here we saw a sudden interest on a piece of content for one of our clients, and it made an insight that the views for this particular screen, is what they call this page, spiked in a particular week. So going beyond creating insights, the last thing I want to point out is that Google and a lot of platforms have a problem right now. More and more people are becoming privacy advocates, at least for themselves. And in doing so, they're installing things like ad blockers and privacy plugins into their browsers. They're moving to Safari, and Safari is working to enable more privacy within the browser. And so you can think of Google Analytics as no longer being an accurate representation of how users are using your website, and instead a tool for sampling how users are using your website. We've just recently started talking to clients with this sampling idea in the last couple of weeks, as we've noticed that the traffic that's in Universal Analytics is missing 13 to 15%, depending on the client, of the activity that's actually going on the site because of people or companies blocking access to Google Analytics through their browser or through their network. Google Analytics 4 tries to compensate for this, and it does it through a couple of different ways. But one of the ways I want to point out is the idea of users. In Universal Analytics, a user was largely based on a device. To some extent, you could pull in their Google user ID would sometimes come into consideration. And sometimes it would, if you were a really savvy marketer, you could push the user ID from a third-party system. So for a lot of our clients, we'll push their marketing automation user ID back into analytics to make sure that analytics knows about that user. But it was clunky. As soon as you started pushing this user ID, it couldn't use the device anymore. And as soon as you started, if it picked up on the Google user, it wouldn't cross-reference that with the device. These were three entirely separate ways for it to keep track of users. And this, the Google method and the device method, are heavily dependent on cookies that are regularly blocked. And so what you saw is that the number of users coming to your website over time, your repeat users, were dropping, even though that wasn't really representative of the actual behavior of the users. The truth is Google was having a harder time capturing them. And that 13 to 14% of traffic that wasn't being captured at all, there's an even larger percentage that was being captured, but every time they came to the site, they were a new person. So Google Analytics 4 takes all three of these signals, but now it combines them to create a profile of a user. So if they wiped the local cookies for your website, but then they went and logged into Google after that, it'll go and reconnect these dots between the device they had and their current their Google login. If you push a user ID, it doesn't mean it's going to ignore the device or the Google signals. It can now seamlessly stitch this data together. And so now you have the ability to more accurately understand who users are and when users come and go from the site, and link users between your app and your website, provided they're logging into both. All right, so that's some of the core differences. Those will come out when we talk a little bit more through the rest of the presentation, but let's talk about what you need to do as a marketer to move. This is pretty simple. One, when do you move? Now, but you don't move. You want to run parallel instances. So get your GA4 set up. For the clients on the call, Brilliant Metrics has already set up a GA4 property for you a while ago. So you've been collecting data there. That gives you two things. One, it means that you aren't going to lose that data when you move over. For a while, Google was hinting that they were going to give a tool to migrate data. All hints of that tool have been wiped from the internet, so it doesn't look like Google is going to be giving us any tool for migration anytime soon. That means you need to be capturing data in GA4 now, so you're not missing all that historical data. Two, GA4 is way more customizable, and some of that customization is really required to get any value out of it, particularly when you look at configuring conversions and setting up your custom events for what matters to you. So by setting up a GA4 property today, you allow some time between when we're forced to cut over to get those events configured, get the property properly set up and configured. Eventually, you'll want to stop the capture of Universal Analytics and stop sending data to both systems. But for the time being, run parallel until GA4 is perfectly stable. You have it set up exactly how you want it, and you're not missing data in Universal Analytics. An example of that is right now we use data imports extensively with our clients in order to be able to add additional information about users and sessions into analytics. We can upload data about users today, but we can't upload data about sessions or events. So we are waiting for that upload capability before we can cut off Universal Analytics for our clients for sure. That probably begs the question, why don't you just run both of them in parallel for forever? And the answer is because it comes with a performance hit. Surprisingly, Google has not actually made GA4 better performing than Universal Analytics. For whatever reason, it is slightly slower, and the not super in-depth scientific tests I ran, I found that, compared to a baseline of no analytics, Universal Analytics, the old analytics, gave a 6% hit to the sample set I was working with. GA4 was a 10% hit, so slightly less performance. So it was hampering the user experience just a hair more than the old analytics did. But when you combine them both, in my tests, I actually ended up with a worse experience than just adding the two numbers together. It resulted in an 18% difference over not having analytics installed at all. So we're starting to edge into a territory of hampering the user experience when the page is showing all the content, but it still shows it's loading to some extent, or things aren't quite as quick when they're clicking on things because it's doing things in the background. So you don't want to run parallel for forever, if nothing else, just because of performance reasons. But in the short term, it's absolutely the way to go. All right, that covers moving. Move now, but not wait to kill the old analytics. Let's talk about some of the gotchas and a few tips, some pro tips that we have come up with as we've been working within this new analytics. One of the key gotchas is you can't really compare conversion data from the old analytics to the new analytics. The numbers will never match up. And the reason being, conversions are counted differently. In Universal Analytics, which was all session-based, a conversion was either did or did not happen in that session. The session converted or the session did not convert. Well, GA4 doesn't really truly look at sessions the same way. Sessions are starting points of a series of other events. And so they look at conversions as a particular event occurring. And one event can occur multiple times within a session and therefore be multiple conversions. So you have the number of conversions per session could actually be higher than one. So for example, if somebody submits the same form 3 times in one session under Universal Analytics, that's one conversion. But if somebody submits the same form 3 times under Google Analytics 4, that's 3 conversions and will come out as such in your reporting. So this is something to be very mindful of as you A, set up your conversions, and B, make sure that you're not just seamlessly moving from one system to the other without making a note somewhere that the data isn't going to match up. That sudden bump in conversions is not due to anything you did. It's due to the fact that they're being measured differently. Next up is data retention. Google is under fire right now for privacy concerns and is requiring to be more and more compliant with various international data and privacy regulations. As such, they made a major step forward with GA4 in setting the retention period for personal data to either 2 or 14 months, but there is no unlimited setting anymore. In the past, we had advised clients operating, especially those that operate mostly or exclusively in the US, to set this to indefinite because it allowed going back in time on reporting to get much higher fidelity data. Now we are advising to go in and change that setting from 2 to 14 months, but definitely go in and change it. Now, that doesn't mean that all of your data disappears after 14 months. It means that individual users cannot be tracked longer than 14 months. So all the personal identifiers to the data disappear before that 14-month window. So don't worry that by moving to GA4, you won't be able to go back and look at anything before last year. You'll still be able to go look back at the analytics. just some of your reporting might not be able to be at the exact level of fidelity that you want it to be, and you certainly won't be able to use any of the new um, user reports going back more than this window of either 2 or 14 months. So if your buyer's journey is longer than 2 months, which I believe is pretty much everyone on this call, you're going to want to go and change this setting right away because the default is 2 months. Another big change, and this one is takes some getting used to. Views are gone. So it used to be that there was a hierarchy within Google Analytics. You had an account that lets you dictate who had access to a particular company's analytics. Underneath an account, you had a series of properties. Properties were the buckets that you put data into, and they still are in GA4. And there are settings inside of a property to handle some of that data. This is also where you link and merge data from other Google products like Google Ads, Google Search Console. They get merged into the property level. But then below that, you had this view object in Universal Analytics, and your view is what you actually clicked on to go and look at data. And you could take the same data bucket of that property and look at it through 2, 3, 4, 20 different lenses. In doing so, different filters were applied to that data on the way back out. This gave you two things. One, you could do things like have one view for one domain and another view for another domain, and still have another view that combined both of those domains because it all came off of the same property. People also used views to restrict access within their organization. So if they wanted to have somebody that could only look at the data associated with a particular website or a particular region or country, they could set up a view specific to that region, country, or website, and then only give that person access to that view. Today, with GA4, views are gone, and they're replaced with comparisons. And what this means to you is that A, you're not going to be able to restrict access to data anymore. You can certainly restrict access to individual reports within GA4. It's kind of a pain and tedious to do, but you could do that. But you can't really stop that person from customizing the report and getting more data out of it. The other thing is that Google is really encouraging you to put everything into one property where users might cross over the experience. So if you have two websites and an app, and the same users would use both websites and potentially the app, or would use any combination of two of them, you're supposed to put all of that into one property. That advice stands, and they're really, if you don't do that, you lose all of the user level analytics that GA4 has invested significantly into making possible. So unless your audiences are completely split and the audience for website A and website B will never cross, and you never want them to cross, you're going to want to set up one property for pretty much everything, and then use what are called comparisons within the tool to be able to get the data out that you want. Oops. So the way comparisons work is there's an opportunity at the top of the interface to click Add Comparison. And then within that comparison, you can say, hey, I only want to include visitors to the host name of brilliantmetrics.com, or I only want to include people who are within a given region. Now, as of today, comparisons can't be saved. So the unfortunate part is, whereas a view would consistently split up your audience and give you that lens that you could just, save the configuration for and go back and look at it, you're going to have to apply probably the same comparisons on a regular basis anytime you want to be able to compare data between two particular groups or narrow in on a particular group. And comparison is a little bit misleading. This was called segments in the old analytics, and it largely follows the same concept. When you build a comparison, you can be comparing one thing to itself only, and essentially becomes a filter. So this is the best solution right now for emulating views. I would strongly discourage you from creating multiple properties to try and emulate views that way. Keep it all in one property so that users can travel between the properties, but use comparisons within the tool to tease out the data that you're looking for. My suspicion is you'll find that there really wasn't as much reason for splitting out that data in the first place, because we're really most interested in user level behavior. That includes which websites and apps and pages and screens they're involved in. Um, but putting that into a cohesive user journey is a lot more valuable. Okay, events. Events are key. Once you have your GA4 property set up and it's collecting data, the next step is to start going through and auditing your website, and if you have an app set up, your app experience, and identifying what are the activities that matter. What are the activities that matter to me for knowing whether or not I'm succeeding, for creating diagnostic indicators to know what might be going wrong, and setting events for those. GA4 gives us a series of automatically configured events that are actually pretty helpful. They include things like page view, which is important, outbound link clicks, I think scrolling and time on page and things like that are built right in. So those are good, but they're probably insufficient for what matters to you. In particular, things like form submits are not in the stock events. You're going to want to get events configured for that. Now, the good news is inside of analytics, you have the ability to create new events. This didn't used to be the case with Universal Analytics. You are limited to spinning off from the current set of events. So like if you want to track when somebody clicks a certain type of link, a link click is a stock event. So you can say, well, okay, I want to get link clicks, but I only want to get link clicks that look like this, that are to this particular page, or that are from this particular page, right? That'll allow you to create some of those custom events. However, my suggestion is that you bite the bullet and learn Tag Manager if you haven't yet, and jump in and use Tag Manager to create these events. Though the event creation capabilities inside of analytics here are really like way more powerful than what you can do with Universal Analytics, they're generally insufficient, and you're still going to find that you need to push custom events over from Google Tag Manager. Now, the process for doing this is really simple and straightforward. It's just a different tag type in Tag Manager. So you just select the GA4 event tag and then say what your event name is, and it just happens. You may want to involve a developer, though, if you're running e-commerce and there isn't a plugin to push GA4 events, or if you are have more of a single page application or a really rich experience. You may want to involve a developer in getting exactly the events, and more importantly, any metrics associated with those events pushed over. Another gotcha associated with Google Analytics 4 is the domain configuration. One of the built-in events is outbound link clicks. In order for it to know what an outbound link click is, it has to know what an inbound link click is. So it's really important that you have your domains configured. Those are configured under what are called data streams. Data streams are sort of the connectors between your properties and the website themselves. And so inside of your data stream configuration, you can, under tag configuration, configure your domains. You're going to want to make sure that every domain is represented under at least one data stream, so that, and ideally under the data stream that actually sends data on that domain, so that you're able to recognize what's an outbound click and what's not an outbound click. The other reason why this is important is because third-party cookies are either dead or dying, depending on the browser that you're using. And that means that information from one domain cannot be shared with another domain unless it is sent as part of that click. And so what Google Analytics will do is if it sees that you're tracking mydomain.com and you're also tracking this other domain.com, anytime somebody's on mydomain.com and they click a link, Google Analytics will modify that link. It's called link decoration. It will decorate that link and add the user ID of the user to the end of that link. So now there will be a bunch of extra parameters at the end of the link that'll allow Google Analytics to pick up on the myotherdomain.com website who that user is and stitch together that user journey between sites. So this is really important to have configured correctly out of the box. All right, now we're going to start getting into some of the fun stuff. The first fun, maybe not fun thing, I celebrated this, is that bounce rates are gone. Bounces are gone. There's no such thing as a bounce since there really isn't any such thing as a session. Technically, what we have instead are engaged sessions. So an engaged session is when somebody stays on a page for 10 seconds or more or engages in 2 or more activities or events within that session time frame. So the way that GA4 works is there's an event called session start, and then it's looking for 2 or more events after that, page view being one of them. If it sees a subsequent page view, then that's an engaged session. If it sees another event that occurs on that page, that could be something that you configured, a form submission, or it could be an outbound link click. It could be any given engagement on that page that you have tracked as an event. It will consider that session an engaged session. This is huge because digital marketing best practices dictate that we are supposed to be creating landing pages or squeeze pages where the user doesn't have anywhere to go except submit a form. Well, we still want to know which people came there by accident and which people came there, read the whole thing, thought about it, and then decided not to submit the form, because there's a huge difference in value between those two audiences. Under the old Google Analytics, bounce rate was one way to go and figure that out, but we didn't really know if there wasn't anything to do on that form, on that page, except convert. We didn't know who was an engaged user on that page. We just knew that they didn't submit the form. We didn't know if they got there by mistake and left right away. Engaged sessions allow us to do that by putting things like scroll depth in as an engagement, as an event, or watching a video would become an event. And YouTube video watching is actually one of the built-in events right into the Google Analytics 4 configuration out of the box. So those sorts of things tell us when we have somebody who's engaged, not just bounce rate. But it's a big, it's a big change for a lot of us. The other big superpower within GA4 is what is called explorations. By the way, people, I am not seeing a ton of questions in the chat here, so please get your questions in. All right, explorations are a series of custom reports that you build. These are great for sharing. These are great for analyzing. And most importantly, they are really good at generating insights instead of just metrics and data. Now, as of today, these are structured into a series of different types. So I'm going to quickly go through these, but I strongly encourage you to spend some time exploring these and understanding them, because some of these are really powerful. Some are more powerful for some organizations than others, and I'll get into that in a second. But this is way more power than we had with Universal Analytics. So the first one is freeform. This is actually pretty similar to the custom reports that were in Universal Analytics. It's basically shiny pivot tables with some nice visualizations and some general tools for slicing and dicing data. If you've got a question that you need answered, or one that you need to go back and look at a regular basis, or exports or reports you need to produce on a regular basis that are just, basically Excel pivot tables on steroids, this is going to be the tool for you. The next type of exploration, by the way, this used to be called, I'm blanking on it. They just renamed this. So explorations is the new term. Analytics Hub. It used to be called the Analysis Hub. This used to be the Analysis Hub. It's now Exploration. So if you're familiar with the Analysis Hub and it's been a little while since you've been in analytics, it's now called Explorations. All right. So the other type of exploration is a cohort analysis. And what a cohort analysis does is, rather than starting from an ending event and kind of backtracking, how long were those users around before that event? What did they do? You start with a starting event. So this can be really useful when you want to compare traffic from two different sources. Let's say that we want to see, well, how long do users stick around, or how long are they actively using our app, our website, our platform, our tool? What does our retention look like when we compare two different sources of that traffic? And it's more useful if you're looking at understanding what your user engagement is over time, and you have an app or a website that people should be coming back to and using on a regular basis. And the reason why it's useful is if you have if you have that style of a web or app presence, then sometimes your growth numbers, your raw numbers of active users, can be not gamed, but they can be tainted. Your metrics can be tainted because you could have an influx of new users covering up an attrition of old users. And so what cohort analysis lets you tease out is when you have those differences. Funnel. The funnel report lets you, it's basically a cascade report. And I apologize, I don't have all of these illustrated, but it's a cascade report that shows you, okay, we had 250 users hit this particular event. The next event in the funnel should be event number 2. Where they engage with a particular landing page. And then event number 3, they should submit a form. And it'll show you how many people you lost in between each step. This is especially useful for e-commerce types of transactions where you have things like viewed product, added to cart, checkout, or multiple pages within the checkout process. So you can see where you're losing users in your process and know where you can focus your efforts for improving that user experience. The segment overlap tool is basically just Venn diagrams for exploring patterns in demographics and users, and how do different groups of users on your website compare. But I think, I'm sorry, user exploration is I don't entirely understand the value of this tool, but it actually lets you dive into individual users' activity on the site. Now, it's all anonymized. But if you are able to link those users back to your that user ID back to a third-party system, you might be able to de-anonymize that data. And I guess it lets you go and say, well, let's go and take a look at how some of our users are actually using our site, and look through their click paths without having to do a screen recording tool like a Hotjar or Microsoft Clarity. My favorite new tool, is the path exploration tool. Now, Universal Analytics had a path exploration tool. It lets you go and explore. Users hit the home page, then they went to one of these 4 pages, then they went to one of these 4 pages, etc. But it only worked forwards. The new path exploration tool works backwards. So now you can take your thank you page and say, show me the path that users followed to get to my thank you page. And it will show you all of the screens or pages they went to get there. And it breaks out that audience as they go back in time through there. So looking forwards, this really helps you identify what the user experience expert Jared Spool calls pogo sticking, where somebody goes in a page, then comes back out of that page and hits the back button, goes to another page, then they go in a different page, then they go back again. Those loops and repeated behaviors that's a hallmark of a bad user experience. It also helps you understand one of the most popular, places for people to go next. But the backwards tool, that helps you understand your funnels. And then off of that, you can go and create your funnels in the funnel exploration and start to optimize those funnels. So hugely powerful. And then finally, because GA4 actually does do a really good job of tracking individual users, they have a new exploration called user lifetime that lets you compare different user groups to see what activities they've done over their entire lifetime on your website. What's cool here is there's some artificial intelligence that will actually tell you predictive behaviors. Finally, I want to throw one other thing out, and that is that with each of these explorations, there is something called anomaly detection. Anomaly detection will actually look at the rate of occurrence of a particular event in a report. And if that rate of occurrence of that event is outside of what was expected based on past performance for a given segment or dimension, it'll actually highlight that with a little circle. And you can go and see what the expected amount of that event was versus the actual. This is really helpful for understanding when something has changed, something shifted abruptly. An example is I went to go and look at one of our clients' reports in GA4, and it called out that when I was looking at page views by device, it called out that there was an anomaly on July 5th that tablet traffic was up something like 50 or 100% for the client. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I realized, well, July 5th was a federal holiday and most companies were closed. And so the desktop traffic had dropped, the tablet traffic went up as people were doing work from home on their iPads instead of at work on their computer or opening up their laptop on their day off. They were quickly doing a little bit of work on their tablets. I thought that was a fascinating example. All right, we talked about these AI insights before. These are really, really powerful today, and I suspect they're only going to get more powerful. This is, instead of looking for looking at those anomalies inside of a report, GA4 is actually actively going to look for these. Now, to get to these, you have to go through the overview tab in Google Analytics and then click on Insights, and you'll see a series of cards of these insights. Some insights are actually insights. Some of them are not. Again, the artificial intelligence can only be so intelligent because it doesn't know what you did. It doesn't know what campaigns you launched, which ads you launched, which emails you sent, etc. So it's just saying, hey, the data went weird here. You might want to look into it if you weren't expecting this. And some of those insights we weren't expecting. So it's an interesting tool. Customization. This is a double-edged sword. The reason why I say that is because there's lots of documentation out there how to use the stock reports within Google Analytics. But if those don't meet your needs, you could literally blow up the entire thing and rebuild it to report on exactly what you want reported, exactly how you wanted it reported. Like, the sky is the limit here. Every single report inside of Google Analytics can be customized, and those customizations saved for the entire organization. You can create new reports from within Google Analytics to display the data that you want to report, how you want it reported, visualized how you want it visualized, for anything. And so while powerful, I want to discourage everyone from just going and blowing away the existing reports unless you're sure they don't provide value to you, because otherwise, each person you bring onto your team now is given a tool that doesn't have the stuff that has documentation for it and has all your custom stuff that, unless you wrote documentation for it, isn't documented. So add to the existing reporting, definitely. Add sections, add reports, but don't go modifying or customizing the heck out of what's there unless it really truly doesn't meet your needs and you intend on documenting all of that so that future users aren't completely lost. All right, before we jump into questions here, I'm going to leave you with one particular parting thought, and that is that GA4 gives us the ability to truly use analytics to measure what we want to measure without having to go and hack it a bunch of ways. This is an ideal time to take stock of what you're measuring and why. Are you measuring something only because it was the metric that was output by analytics and it wasn't worth the effort to go and try and code in a new metric and deal with custom reports to get the data back out? My guess is most of us are. And so GA4 is an opportunity to take a big step back and look at what are you measuring and why. Okay. With that, let's dive into questions here. We have I think about 7 or 8 minutes to get some questions answered here. Elizabeth asks, what is the #1 thing I should be doing today in Google Analytics 4? And the #1 thing is getting started. Get it installed if it's not installed, and if it is installed, start going in there and learning and playing. Explore the explorations. That sounds weird. To learn about what's possible in those explorations. Too much content for me to cover in one webinar here. Explore the whole change with sessions, because sessions are still a thing represented in the reports, but events aren't. It's different. You have to get in there and play. And then start making a wish list of your events that you want tracked and figuring out whether you can track them as a marketer or you need to involve a developer to get them tracked. Gabriella asks, in order to mirror our universal analytics on Google Analytics 4, does that require us to flesh out events on our own? And are they standardized at all to help with that? Again, you're never going to achieve one-to-one mirroring between Universal Analytics and GA4. That's part of why Google decided to make this not an upgrade to your existing properties, but you're setting up whole new properties, is because that mirroring is not really possible. You can send data to both of them. You can run them both in parallel and send data to both of them, but your metrics that you get back out will be different. Coming back to Elizabeth's point, what to do today, get this set up and start to understand those differences so that you can compare and know, well, when I look at users, I get a very different number in Universal Analytics versus GA4, and here's why. The events, there is a series of I believe 5 standard events that cover most use cases and basically cover what Universal Analytics was tracking out of the box. But any custom events you set up inside of Universal Analytics, you will have to go and set those up inside of GA4 again, separately. If you're running Tag Manager, it's really easy. They literally have an event tag. And then you'll have to also set up all of your conversions. But if you just ran vanilla stock Universal Analytics, then your stock events will also show up in GA4. Robin asks, for clients of Brilliant Metrics, what changes need to happen in Tag Manager in the near future for GA4? We have been making those changes on our clients' behalf to start pushing the data over. We're going to continue to refine them over the course of the next several months as we get ready to start being able to pull our data integrations from Universal Analytics to GA4. We're waiting for that data import function. Where if it doesn't come, then we're going to have to pivot how we do reporting as an organization. So we have a plan B in place, but we're waiting a little bit. So sit tight, go in there and play. You have access to it. Learn about it. You'll find more and more event data flowing in as the months go on. Let's see here. Elizabeth asks, what is the best resource for staying up to date on GA4 updates and features? There's actually a page, and I can link to that in the thank you email for this webinar that Google publishes that has the updates, the current releases, and what they have changed. I'll make sure that those release notes are included in an email from here so you can kind of peek in there if something seems off and you want to figure out what the heck they did. Or if you just want to check in, every once in a while to see, what features they've added, because they are continuing to add features. So we'll get that in the thank you email. Something nobody asked and I didn't address, so I'm going to ask myself a question. When are we going to have to cut over from Universal Analytics to GA4? I forgot to mention that. And the answer is, I don't know, but I also can't tell you how much notice you're going to get. There are two reasons why you may have to cut over. One of them is that Google puts an end of life on Universal Analytics. That will happen someday. That could come with, 3 months notice. That could come with 3 years notice. It's probably going to be somewhere in between there. I wouldn't expect a 3-month notice on the end of life for Universal Analytics. But the other reason, and this is probably the more likely reason, is that some feature or integration that you rely on really, really want to use is only going to be available in GA4. So you may find that the next iteration of the integration with Google Ads that you're using only works with GA4. And now to get the right data you need to be looking at your reports in GA4. Or you may find that that one of those explorations is just amazing and totally, solves a data problem you have. Well, now you've got a reason to move over to GA4 and use it as your primary data source, because while you're reporting sometimes from Universal Analytics and sometimes from GA4, you have two different versions of the truth and they won't jive all the time. So you can't, actively report to your organization from both. You need to make a cutover on where you're getting your data from. All right, with that, I want to encourage everyone to reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn for more content like this. Email me if you have any more questions, or DM me on LinkedIn. That works too. And if you haven't followed Brilliant Metrics on LinkedIn, please do go out and follow Brilliant Metrics on LinkedIn to be aware of future webinars and content like this. With that, thank you all for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.